Hello everyone and welcome to our first live stream about CRONUS Foundations. This is a project that I explained a little bit about in our live stream It's Not a Sprint, but today is going to be the first episode. We're going to keep it tight and short, so probably 15 minutes or so, rather than going deep dive. Future episodes we're going to be spending more time going through some of the mechanics of it, but today we're going to talk what's the point, who's it for, what are we trying to accomplish, all that fun stuff. So let's dive into that and talk about what are we doing here. The CRONUS Foundation idea came about because the CRONUS data, that is the demo data in the company, has been a challenge in the past. And really what we need when we're working with a product is we need demonstration data that achieves three main goals. It needs to demonstrate relatable content for future users. Sorry, I'm not going to read slides, promise. But it needs to be clear why this matters to people. It needs to be a clear example. It needs to be, if I were to start using this system, is this how I would configure it? It needs to be relatable in that way. It also needs to be useful when we're doing testing. A lot of the unit tests that we develop, there are great libraries that are things like, quickly create customers and create items and test ship them and all that fun stuff. But they run under the assumption that you also have a GL account and you have posting groups and all those sort of things. And we currently, for the most part, it's not practical for us to do anything but assume that CRONUS is set up. And that has its own danger, or we have to spend a significant amount of time building all that into our testing pipeline. So there's some iffy there. And then there's also the fact that across different training documents, you need demonstration data to show functionality in a good way. Like if a customer needs to understand, how do I drop ship somebody a replacement for return? Well, that's a perfectly normal process, but you don't want to have to take 20 minutes to configure all the precursor steps to be able to show someone how to fulfill that, what is actually a pretty easy task in Business Central. But if you have to go, hang on a minute, and then you sit there for 20 minutes setting up everything to show off the easy process, that doesn't give a good customer feel. So demonstration data needs to fill a lot of roles, and Business Central has a lot of functionality. So how do you show that in a good way? Well, unfortunately, we have a pretty lengthy history of the demonstration data has been a Frankenstein is not the nice word, but it's been cobbled together from lots of different parts. For those of you who don't know your Business Central history, warehousing and manufacturing used to be separate systems. They were flavors of product. They got merged together right about the same time Microsoft bought the product from the original developers. The demonstration data reflected that for a very, very long time. If you haven't worked with it much since version 18 has come out in the past few months, definitely take a look. Don't make assumptions that you know what current CRONUS looks like. We all have seen for a very long time this mishmash of a company with locations that were color-based, and you had to just memorize what does the white location use, what does red location have for stock. We had crazy things like bicycle assemblies and manufacturing. We had computer assembly work. We had furniture. We had resources of delivery. That's been compressed down, I think, a little bit better. And historically, we also didn't have a whole lot of information in the system to base demo data off of. For example, a lot of times the CRONUS environments tended to only have opening balances and then 2 or 3 transactions for January, which is typically when most CRONUS databases are configured to use due to licensing. The demonstration data, therefore, was really thin, especially if you wanted to do anything useful, like show a month-by-month history or comparative to prior year. There wasn't much there. I've seen definitely some evidence that the team is working to fix a lot of these shortcomings of the product. And when I was looking through an 18 sandbox today using the new company wizard, things looked better. So it's going in the right direction, but it's not a high value target for investing. Most of us would rather more functionality and all those sort of things than seeing them spend a couple of months just going heads down on demonstration data. So let's jump in and help with that. And so to that end, this project is making an open source toolkit that will generate test data. The idea behind this is that this is going to be something that I'm going to be putting into a public repository. People can just download it, they can use it, they can do pull requests to help add to it. But the main idea of this is that, first of all, it's a big product. It doesn't make sense to make one demonstration company that tries to fulfill all the different roles of the product. That makes it too hard for a user to understand. If they're a small company that's trying to do basic order fulfillment, seeing all these settings in there around really complex things aren't going to help them understand the product. It's not relatable. And then as part of the mechanisms of the toolkit, which we'll talk about in a moment, it's going to be something that we're going to generate on demand with the new company wizard. I think we can probably extend and hook into that, which will be pretty great to be able to quickly do that. But also it needs to be accessible for people who are building solutions on the platform to make an easy deployable pipeline. And there are also some great tools in the market for spinning up demonstration environments, and those automations need to be able to have this in their tool set as well. And one of the other big challenges when it comes to demonstration of the solution is many of the partners in the channel are ISVs. They're independent software vendors that are creating solutions that work on top of Business Central. They have to then add logic into their toolkit that when this is dropped into a database for a CRONUS environment, it needs to populate lots and lots of information about their solution. If they have a whole complicated rental solution for renting equipment, they might have a whole separate setup area, and they would like to see transactional history that makes sense, showing all that history. So part of this toolkit is about making the transactional data a consistent chunk of data that ISVs and partners are able to make changes to that before it posts and then have it go the rest of the way through. And I think that will give a better handle for people to be able to make demonstration data consistent across all their environments. I also very much envision that we could expand pretty easily how big the data set is. Even with the improvements that I've noticed in 18, it's still pretty thin. There's a few, maybe a few transactions a month against half a dozen customers, half a dozen vendors as well. So it's okay. But last but not least, the configuration of CRONUS does not currently line up with how companies work. It's not bad. I mean, we all have to track funding, and totally fair. Every single region has to have its own localization to match local accounting practices and things like that. So that does introduce some challenges. What I envision there is that we're going to need to have localization extensions off of this, just the same way we do with the base product. So how will this little toolkit work? The idea is that we have extensive data built into the tool to get things started. We generate all of the master data, so customers, items, GL accounts, everything across all of those core areas, all the postings, setup, all that sort of thing. We have event hooks at each step along the way here that ISVs and partners can attach to and be able to make changes to add some of their own logic to. And then using that data set, that they will be able to create transactional data, add some of their own information to those different steps, and then go ahead and finally we would post that transactional data. The last step is then we would do some finalizing, and that is a matter of, for example, maybe we don't want to have credit warnings, out of stock warnings, and things like that tripping the posting process, but we do want to demonstrate how it should be configured at the end. So we would have some finalization. And then it's ready to use in testing and demos. Based on my experience with things so far, I think that this won't add too much of a burden if we are doing a comprehensive test suite. So we'll see. We're definitely going to keep an eye on what is performant to make sure that we're not slowing people down. With that in mind, what does this toolkit actually bring to the table for people? And the idea here is that we're going to create 5 different companies, each with a much more narrow, relevant focus to different parts of the system, so that way it's more relatable. It's much easier to put one of these companies in front of a customer and have them go, oh, okay, yeah, that's kind of like what I'm doing, rather than the demonstration catch-all company. And the envision here is that we would have the parent company, Creatures Consolidated, will be the main parent company that all of the financials roll up to. The Plays the Thing is a pet toy company and various basic supplies, and they do buying and selling. They do some basic like loot crate-y sort of monthly subscription assembly stuff, and we're going to do lots of things in that space around discounts and substitutions, drop shipments, and that sort of thing. Lots of multi-currency, so that way we can reflect how people might sell products around the world. The all-you-can-see company sells customized and off-the-shelf fish tanks, for example, and we're going to have that be about the project module, where they're going to be going into how do you create jobs, how do you book time against those jobs, the off-the-shelf ones that you create, how do you potentially do service warranties and repair work around that. That, by the way, service module is one of 2 major areas of the system that is in the premium category rather than essentials. So we'll see how often people may need of that, but it's a nice to have. The Eyes Your Feast, this is going to be a company about manufacturing pet food. So we have to do manufacturing processes. We need to do very careful lot tracking on the receiving and shipping out. And that'll be a multi-location company where we're doing different operations in different places. So there's some good potential there. And then Pet Plethora is going to be a company that's a big warehousing company, doing lots of things, moving goods around the world. And we're also going to make heavy use of the marketing parts of the system, where they're going to be promoting different solutions or products to different companies. They're going to do campaigns, and we'll show how all of that stuff works. Timeline isn't fixed because this is a we'll see how it goes project. It's a bold experiment. We'll see. But we are tying the major releases to the 5 different versions. So we're going to start with the one that is most relatable for everyone. Basic sales and purchasing, light inventory, the Plays the Thing. And that'll give us a good sense of partner adoption, what's valuable to people, what things we can learn around that, and that way we can bring that forward into these more complex different parts of the solution. So that's the timeline there. And since manufacturing is the other module that is the premium module, that one's going to go way down towards the end of the list. So that's the flow on the timeline. What we're going to be doing around this is that we're going to be doing weekly streaming to talk about what's the progress, the goals, and after the initial part of the stream like this, where we're just doing kind of a talk through of where we are, we'll do a deeper dive into what does the code look like, what has been added, what's coming up, and that way it's more feasible for any developers who want to join in and help make these things, be able to do pull requests as we're going, and we can thank people for the pull requests as that goes through. And as we get closer and closer to an actual functional product, right now we have nothing. We have a plan. As we get closer to actual product, we'll want some people who will be happy to do some alpha testing. That includes testing it from a is it functionally useful to demonstrate the product, but also is it good to use in testing pipelines and things like that. This is going to take a lot of time. I know this, but it's a labor of something that I won't say love, but it is definitely something that is I very much feel the need to have and want to make. So I'm going to be making this anyways. If you would like to support this, I'm going to have the Patreon set up for Spare Brain, and to help encourage people to support this project, I am going to be additionally creating demo scripts on how to demonstrate the different modules of the product, how to do walkthroughs for customers and internal training, how to do setup of the different modules. All of those things are going to be available in the Patreon to supporters, so that way they can have access to it. You sign up, you get access right away. That is definitely in progress because we don't have code yet. And I'll have open Q&A sessions where people can jump into a Teams call and we'll talk about what's going on. There's a bunch of other things that are going to be on Patreon, so keep an eye on that. Well, with that plugged, just going to do one more thing before we wrap for the day, as I promised, aiming for sub 20 minutes. As we talked about, CRONUS Foundations, I do have this up under the community section of the Spare Brain Ideas site, so if you need to see or explain to anyone what the different companies are about, here are all the different pieces, and I'll be updating that in the near future with a functionality map that I've been working along on. I've taken most of the core functional areas of the system here and broken those out to the different entities. So that way we have a really good, clear checklist of what's left for each entity, what's set up, what's done and ready to test. And we're going to use this as kind of the roadmap of the different solutions. And I'm a kind of graphic designery thinking sort of person. So what I envision is I'm going to keep the CRONUS Foundation section of the Spare Brain Idea site up and running, and we are going to have little progress indicators on all of these little cells. So that way you can get a sense of, hey, I've got, a company coming up and they would really like to be able to do a better demonstration of a cash flow forecast, and CRONUS demo data only has 1 year of data. So where are we at on the demonstration data for cash flow forecasting? Well, that's going to be something that'll be up and available on the site. So hopefully this will be a fun project and useful. I think there's a lot of great potential here. As you can see, I've broken down some of the things in great detail. Sales and receivables, for example, is obviously broken down to the different parts. Same here in inventory. Inventory can have a lot of different moving parts. So some pieces are going to only be for one company, some pieces for another. Whereas some of these larger modules like warehousing, manufacturing, project management, jobs, and those sort of things are more summarized since they're obviously specifically tied to one entity. So this is the project, and I'm looking greatly forward to some of the different things that are going to be possible with these tools put in people's hands. For example, I'm going to steal some of the code over from our beginning corporation and say, well, could we potentially do a solution where, we need to do a 10-year cash flow forecast? Can we just randomly generate years 1 through 7 and have our 3 years of history data? Sure, why not? So there's a lot of things that become possible with this sort of tool set in our hands. So that brings us to, I believe, the end of what we were going to talk about today. And we'll be in the future doing just a few minute recap at the beginning of every Wednesday 3 p.m. stream. And then after that, we're going to be doing a lot more codes, hands-on and everything. I will definitely be very vocal on Twitter and LinkedIn whenever there is some moment that is going to be much more general like this. If we're at a place where we're going to be able to do our first test run through of now let's look at how the data looks, well, I'll make sure we're vocal about that. So, hopefully you all enjoyed, and you will hopefully find this project at least interesting to keep an eye on, and I hope you'll keep watching. Take care, everybody.